In just 300 years, European art went from flat, symbolic figures to the Mona Lisa, the Sistine Chapel, and some of the most famous images ever made. This is the complete history of Renaissance art. To understand the Renaissance, we have to begin around the year 1300. For much of the medieval period, art was not trying to look realistic. It was mainly religious, symbolic, and spiritual. Figures often looked flat, space was shallow, emotion was restrained. And then came Giotto. Giotto di Bondone was not a Renaissance artist in the full sense, but he lit the fuse. In his frescoes in the Scrovegni Chapel in Padua, people suddenly seem to have weight. They cry, they turn their bodies, they stand in believable spaces. Giotto di Bondone was not fully Renaissance yet, but he lit the fuse. In his frescoes at the Scrovegni Chapel in Padua, people suddenly feel heavy. They bend, they turn, they cry. Look at his lamentation. The figures are gathered around the dead Christ, but this is not just a religious symbol. It feels like a human tragedy. That is the first big pivot. Art begins moving back toward real life. Then, in the 1400s, Florence becomes the engine room of the Renaissance. This matters because Florence was rich, competitive, and obsessed with status. Powerful families, especially the Medici, wanted art that made them look sophisticated, intelligent, and almost heroic. And artists gave them exactly that. The next breakthrough was perspective. Around the early 1400s, Filippo Brunelleschi worked out linear perspective, a system that let artists create believable depth on a flat surface. That might sound technical, but it changed everything. Suddenly, a painting could feel like a window you could step through. Masaccio's Holy Trinity is one of the great early examples. The architecture appears to recede into real space. The figures stand naturally. The viewer is no longer looking at a flat icon. You are looking into a constructed world. This is pivot number 2. Artists learn to control space. At the same time, sculpture is reborn. Donatello's David brings back something Europe had barely seen since ancient Rome, the freestanding nude figure. The human body is no longer something to flatten or hide. It becomes something to study, understand, and celebrate. This is where humanism enters the story. Humanism did not mean rejecting religion. It meant placing human experience, human intelligence, and human beauty back at the center of culture. Artists studied anatomy. They studied ancient ruins. They studied Greek and Roman sculpture. They wanted to make art that felt alive. But while Italy was mastering space and anatomy, the North was mastering detail. In 1434, Jan van Eyck painted the Arnolfini portrait, and it is almost ridiculously precise. The fur, the polished brass, the tiny mirror in the background, the light on the floor, everything is rendered with extraordinary care. Italian artists were asking, how do we build space? Northern artists were asking, how do we capture the surface of reality? And eventually those two worlds would meet. By the late 1400s, Florence had moved even further from medieval art. Botticelli's Birth of Venus is a perfect example. Then comes the Mona Lisa. The reason it matters is not just that it is famous. It is the subtlety, the smoky shadows, the lifelike skin, the expression that seems to shift while you look at it. Leonardo makes a portrait feel like a living mind. But if Leonardo is mystery, Michelangelo is power. In 1504, Michelangelo completes David. A huge block of marble becomes a figure of perfect tension. David is not shown after killing Goliath. He is shown before the fight, alert, focused, ready. That choice is everything. The drama is psychological. The body is still, but the mind is active. For Florence, David became more than a sculpture. It became a symbol of a small republic standing against larger powers. Then Michelangelo is called to Rome to paint the Sistine Chapel ceiling. He does not even want the job. He sees himself as a sculptor, not a painter. But the result becomes one of the defining achievements in art history. The creation of Adam is the image everyone remembers. 2 hands, almost touching, God giving life to man. It is theology, anatomy, and visual electricity in one image. At the same time, Raphael creates the most balanced version of Renaissance ideals. His school of Athens gathers the great philosophers of the ancient world into one grand architectural space. Plato points upward. Aristotle gestures toward the earth. Around them are thinkers, scientists, mathematicians, and artists. It is not just a painting of philosophy. It is the Renaissance worldview in one image. Ancient wisdom, human reason, perfect space, and ideal beauty. But the Renaissance was not only calm and perfect. North of the Alps, artists were pushing in stranger directions. Albrecht Dürer turns printmaking into a major art form. That matters because prints can travel. Images can now spread faster, cheaper, and further than paintings locked inside churches or palaces. And then there is Hieronymus Bosch. His Garden of Earthly Delights is one of the strangest masterpieces ever made. It is filled with bizarre creatures, bodies, fruit, pleasure, punishment, paradise, and nightmare. Bosch reminds us that the Renaissance was not just about beauty. It was also about fear, sin, curiosity, and the unknown. Then comes one of the biggest shocks in European history, the Reformation. In 1517, Martin Luther challenges the authority of the Catholic Church. Across parts of Northern Europe, religious images come under attack. Some Protestants see lavish church art as corrupt, distracting, or even idolatrous. This creates a major split. In Protestant regions, artists often move toward portraits, prints, landscapes, and scenes of everyday life. In Catholic regions, the Church doubles down on the emotional power of art. After the Council of Trent, Catholic art is expected to be clear, dramatic, and persuasive. It has to move people. And this is where Renaissance harmony begins to crack. After Raphael dies in 1520, artists are left with a difficult question. If perfection has already been achieved, what comes next? One answer is mannerism. In Parmigianino's Madonna of the Long Neck, the figures are elegant but strange. The neck is too long. The bodies are stretched. The space feels unstable. Mannerism is the Renaissance becoming self-conscious. It is beauty pushed until it almost breaks. In Venice, Titian and Tintoretto push painting toward richer color, movement, and atmosphere. In Spain, El Greco stretches figures into something spiritual and intense. His view of Toledo feels less like a city and more like a storm of emotion. And then, around 1600, Caravaggio arrives. With works like The Calling of St. Matthew, he drags sacred stories into dark rooms filled with ordinary people. A beam of light cuts across the painting. The figures react like actors caught in a real moment. This is no longer Raphael's calm, balanced world. This is the beginning of the Baroque. So the Renaissance does not end suddenly. It transforms. It begins with Giotto giving figures emotion. It grows with Brunelleschi and Masaccio giving art depth. It expands with Van Eyck, giving it detail. Botticelli gives it myth. Leonardo gives it mystery. Michelangelo gives it power. Raphael gives it harmony. And Caravaggio pushes it into drama. In just 300 years, art was reborn, and with it came the modern idea of the artist as a genius, a thinker, and a creator. If you enjoyed this video and would like to learn more about individual artists and their masterpieces, be sure to subscribe.